The young and dynamic Sri.A.Revanth Reddy Garu, the Chief Minister of Telangana since 7th December 2023. He led a sustained campaign against the incumbent TRS government and led the victory of Congress in the state of Telangana. He represents Kodangal constituency in Telangana Legislative Assembly. Revanth Reddy Garu is an example for all the youth. He not merely dreams but transforms his dreams in reality by the way of his hard working.
మిత్రులారా, దసరా సందర్భంగా గత 19 సంవత్సరాల నుంచి మన అందరి అభిమాన వ్యక్తి, రాజకీయాలకు అతీతంగా ప్రతి ఒక్కరి చేత గౌరవింపబడే బండారు దత్తాత్రేయ గారు దసరా ఉత్సవాల సందర్భంగా 19 సంవత్సరాల నుంచి అలై బలై కార్యక్రమాన్ని ఏర్పాటు చేసి అంతరించిపోతున్న సంస్కృతి సాంప్రదాయాలను పునరుజ్జీవింపజేసి తెలంగాణ రాష్ట్రంలో రాజకీయాలకు
ఇప్పుడు నేను ముఖ్యమంత్రి గారిని మీకు ఇంతకుముందు చెప్పినట్టుగా ఒక విషయం గుర్తు చేయడానికి ముందుకు వచ్చినాను. అదేమిటంటే ఈసారి అలై బలైలో ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి గ్రామీణ చేతి వృత్తుల యొక్క ముఖ్యంగా ఓబీసీ వర్గాల్లో ఉన్నటువంటి చేనేత, గీత, గొర్రె కార్మికులు మరియు అనేకమైనటువంటి కమ్మరి, కుమ్మరి ఇట్లాంటి అనేక మంది గ్రామీణమైనటువంటి వ్యవస్థల వాళ్ళను వారు ఈసారి ప్రదర్శన చేయడం ఉద్దేశం ఏంటంటే ఆ యువకుల్లో, తెలంగాణలో ఉన్న యువకుల్లో వారికి నైపుణ్యత ఇచ్చి, సాంకేతికనిచ్చి వారు స్టార్ట్అప్కు ఎదిగే విధంగా చేయాలని నా యొక్క ఉద్దేశము. కాబట్టి నేను తప్పకుండా హర్యానా గవర్నర్ అయినా తెలంగాణ బిడ్డగా దానికి నేను మీకు సంపూర్ణంగా సహకరిస్తానని హృదయపూర్వకంగా మనవి చేస్తూ ఉన్నాను. అలాగే ముఖ్యమంత్రి గారిని ప్రసంగించాల్సింది కోరుతున్నాను.
ఈ కార్యక్రమం తెలంగాణ సంస్కృతిని నలు దిశలా వ్యాపింపజేయడానికే కాదు, నాటి తెలంగాణ ఉద్యమంలో తెలంగాణ రాష్ట్ర సాధన ప్రక్రియ ఆలస్యమైనప్పుడు పొలిటికల్ జేఏసీని ఏర్పాటు చేయడానికి నా ఉద్దేశంలో ఈ అలై బలై కార్యక్రమమే ఒక స్ఫూర్తిగా మనకు ఉపయోగపడ్డది అని చెప్పి నేను భావిస్తున్నా. అంతకంటే ముందు ఎప్పుడు కూడా తెలంగాణ సమాజంలో, ఉమ్మడి ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్లో రాజకీయ పార్టీల వారీగా కార్యక్రమాలు ఉండేటివి. కానీ బండారు దత్తాత్రేయ గారు తెలంగాణ సంస్కృతి సాంప్రదాయాలను కాపాడాలన్న ఆలోచనతోని 19 సంవత్సరాల క్రితం ఈ అలై బలై కార్యక్రమాన్ని ప్రారంభించి దిగ్విజయంగా వారు నిర్వహించడంతో తెలంగాణ ఉద్యమంలో జెండాలకు, ఎజెండాలకు అతీతంగా ఒక పొలిటికల్ జేఏసీని ఏర్పాటు చేసి తెలంగాణ రాష్ట్రాన్ని సాధించుకోవడానికి ఈ అలై బలై ఒక స్ఫూర్తిగా పనిచేసింది అని చెప్పి నేను ఈ సందర్భంగా సవినయంగా మీ అందరికీ విజ్ఞప్తి చేస్తున్నా. ఆనాడు తెలంగాణ ఉద్యమంలో ఆర్ఎస్ఎస్ నుంచి ఆర్ఎస్యు వరకు, కమ్యూనిస్టు నుంచి కాంగ్రెస్ వరకు, కుమ్మరి, కమ్మరి, వడ్రంగి, చాకలి, మంగలి, ముదిరాజ్ సోదరులు, అన్ని సామాజిక వర్గాలకు సంబంధించిన వాళ్ళు కార్యోన్ముఖులై తెలంగాణ రాష్ట్ర సాధనలో అందరూ అడుగు ముందుకు వేయడానికి ఈ కార్యక్రమం ఎంతో సహకరించిందని నేను భావిస్తున్నా. అదేవిధంగా తెలంగాణ ప్రజలకు అతిపెద్ద పండుగ దసరా పండుగ. దసరా పండుగ అంటే మొట్టమొదట గుర్తొచ్చేది తెలంగాణ ప్రజలకు పాలపిట్ట, జమ్మి చెట్టు. అదేవిధంగా అలై బలై కార్యక్రమం అంటే మొట్టమొదట గుర్తొచ్చేది బండారు దత్తాత్రేయ గారు అని చెప్పి నేను ఈరోజు చెప్పదలుచుకున్నాను. అంతకుముందు ఎవరికి వాళ్ళు దసరా పండుగ పూర్తి చేసుకొని కుటుంబంలో ఉండే పెద్దలకు, బంధువులకు, మిత్రులకు జమ్మి పెట్టి అలై బలై చేసుకొని మనందరం అభివృద్ధి పదం వైపు నడవాలి, మన ప్రాంతం సుఖశాంతులతోని పాడి పంటలతోని వర్ధిల్లాలి అని మనం కోరుకునే పండుగ. అలాంటి పండుగ ఈరోజు దత్తాత్రేయ గారి నుంచి వారి వారసత్వంగా ఈరోజు బండారు విజయలక్ష్మి గారు ఈ కార్యక్రమాలను నిర్వహిస్తున్నారు. వారిని మనస్ఫూర్తిగా విజయలక్ష్మిని నేను అభినందిస్తున్నా. దత్తాత్రేయ గారు అందించిన వారసత్వం ఈ తెలంగాణ సంస్కృతి సాంప్రదాయాల వారసత్వం. ఈ తెలంగాణ సంస్కృతి సాంప్రదాయాల వారసత్వాన్ని బండారు విజయలక్ష్మి గారు కూడా దిగ్విజయంగా నిర్వహిస్తారని నాకు సంపూర్ణమైన విశ్వాసం ఉంది. అందుకే ఈరోజు ప్రభుత్వం పరంగా కూడా మా పార్టీ పరంగా కూడా ముఖ్యమైన నాయకులు రాష్ట్ర అధ్యక్షులు మహేష్ కుమార్ గౌడ్తో పాటు మా పెద్దలు హనుమంతరావు గారు, మా కేశవరావు గారు, పొన్నం ప్రభాకర్ గారు, ప్రభుత్వం అంతా కూడా ఇక్కడికి తరలి వచ్చి బండారు దత్తాత్రేయ గారు నిర్వహిస్తున్న, బండారు విజయలక్ష్మి గారు నిర్వహిస్తున్న ఈ అలాయ్ బలాయ్ కార్యక్రమంలో పాల్గొని దీనికి సాంప్రదాయమే ప్రతీక, దీనికి రాజకీయాలతో సంబంధం లేదు. తెలంగాణ సాంప్రదాయాలను కాపాడుకోవడం మన అందరి బాధ్యత. ఈ సంస్కృతి సాంప్రదాయాలను నిలబెట్టుకోవాల్సిన అవసరం ఉన్నదని తెలియజేస్తూ ఇంత మంచి కార్యక్రమాన్ని ఏర్పాటు చేసి ఈ వేదిక మీద మన తెలంగాణ గవర్నర్, హర్యానా గవర్నర్గా దత్తన్న, రాజస్థాన్ గవర్నర్గా, అదే విధంగా కేంద్ర మంత్రి కిషన్ రెడ్డి గారు, ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్ మంత్రి సత్యకుమార్ గారు, తెలంగాణ నుంచి మంత్రులు, పార్లమెంట్ సభ్యులు, శాసన సభ్యులు, కుల సంఘాలకు సంబంధించిన నాయకులు, ఎమ్మెల్సీలు, ముఖ్యంగా తెలంగాణ కవులు, కళాకారులు గోరటి వెంకన్న, వందే మాత్రం శ్రీనివాస్ గారు కూడా ఈ కార్యక్రమంలో హాజరై ఈ సంస్కృతిలో మేమందరం ఒక్కటే అనే సందేశాన్ని తెలంగాణ సమాజానికే కాదు ఈ దేశానికి అందించినందుకు వారందరినీ మనస్ఫూర్తిగా అభినందిస్తూ మీ అందరి దగ్గర సెలవు తీసుకుంటున్న. ధన్యవాదాలు మిత్రులారా.
ఇప్పుడు మన యొక్క కేంద్ర మంత్రి మాట్లాడే ముందు, కిషన్ రెడ్డి గారు మాట్లాడే ముందు వి హనుమంతరావు గారు సీనియర్ కాంగ్రెస్ పార్టీ నాయకులు, వారిని ప్రసంగించాల్సిందిగా కోరుతున్నారు. వారి తర్వాత కిషన్ రెడ్డి గారు మాట్లాడతారు, గవర్నర్ గారు పెడతారు, ముఖ్యమంత్రి గారిని కొద్దిసేపు హనుమంతరావు గారి మాట వినాలని, హనుమంతరావు గారి మాట వింటే మంచిగా ఉంటుంది. హనుమంతరావు గారు పాపం రిక్వెస్ట్ చేశాడు. మహేష్ గౌడ్ గారు, వారికి కూడా నేను హృదయపూర్వకమైన స్వాగతం తెలియజేస్తున్నాను. హనుమంతరావు గారిని మాట్లాడాల్సింది కోరుతున్నాను.
సభకు నమస్కారం. సభకు పెట్టినటువంటి ఈ కార్యక్రమం అలై బలై పెద్దలు బండారు దత్తాత్రేయ గారు, వారి కుమార్తె విజయలక్ష్మి గారు, వేదికపై ఉన్నటువంటి మా ముఖ్యమంత్రి రేవంత్ రెడ్డి గారు, అదేవిధంగా కిషన్ రెడ్డి గారు, ఇతర రాష్ట్రాల నుంచి వచ్చినటువంటి గవర్నర్లు, మిత్రులారా, సోదరులారా, ఈ సాంప్రదాయంకు తెలంగాణ సంస్కృతి, తెలంగాణ ఆటపోటలు తినే విషయంలో కూడా తెలంగాణ వంటకాలు ఎట్లుంటాయని చెప్పినటువంటి ఏకైక వ్యక్తి బండారు దత్తాత్రేయ. ఈయన ఆనాడు ప్రభుత్వంలో మేము లేము, కానీ ఆనాడు ఉన్నటువంటి ప్రభుత్వంలో కూడా ఆలోచన చేసి మొట్టమొదటిగా కార్యక్రమం పెట్టాడు సోమాజిగూడ దగ్గర. ఆ తర్వాత కంటిన్యూస్గా ఈ కార్యక్రమం చేపడుతూ ఉంటే అలై భలై అంటే చాలా మందికి తెలియదు. సాంప్రదాయం అన్నదమ్ములుగా విడిపోయినా, అన్నదమ్ములుగా సంవత్సరానికి ఒక్కసారైనా కలిసినా ఆ కల్చర్ మనది. అదేవిధంగా ఇవాళ నేను మా ముఖ్యమంత్రి గారు చెప్పారు, ఈ సాంప్రదాయం కొనసాగించాలంటే ఆంధ్రలో కూడా ఇది పెట్టాలరా బాబు. ఎందుకంటే అక్కడ ఒకసారి యుద్ధం ప్రకటిస్తే వాళ్ళ ముఖం వీళ్ళు చూడరు, వీళ్ళ ముఖం వాళ్ళు చూడరు. ఈ సాంప్రదాయం విజయలక్ష్మి గారు వచ్చే సంవత్సరం రాయలసీమలో పెట్టండి. అక్కడ ఒకసారి యుద్ధం ప్రకటిస్తే ఇటువాడు ఇటే, అటువాడు అటువే, వేరు సాంప్రదాయాలు ఉన్నాయి అక్కడ. ఈ కల్చర్ ఆంధ్రలో కూడా రావాలి. గతంలో ఇక్కడ చంద్రబాబు గారు ముఖ్యమంత్రి ఉన్నప్పుడు కానీ, అంతకుముందు ఎన్టీ రామారావు గారు ఉన్నప్పుడు కానీ ఇక్కడ మేము అన్నాం, తెలంగాణ కావాలంటే అన్నదమ్ములుగా ఉందాం, అన్నదమ్ములుగా విడిపోదాం అని రెచ్చగొట్టలే. ఆంధ్ర వాళ్ళను వెళ్ళిపోమని చెప్పలే, అన్నదమ్ములుగా ఉందాం, అన్నదమ్ములుగా విడిపోదామని. కనుక ఈ సాంప్రదాయం ఆంధ్రలో కూడా వస్తే కలిసి ఉంటే కల సుఖం. అదేవిధంగా ఈనాడు ఈ కార్యక్రమం మంగళం అనే సినిమా వచ్చింది, అందులో చూసిన 30 ఏళ్ళు విడిపోయినటువంటి కుటుంబాలు కూడా ఏకమవుతున్నాయి. రాయలసీమలో కూడా ఈ కల్చర్ పోవాలి. ఈ కల్చర్ కొట్టుకోవడం పొడుచుకోవడం కాదు, కలిసి ఉందాం. ఈ సాంప్రదాయం దసరా సంబంధంలో సాంప్రదాయం ఆంధ్రలో కూడా రావాలని కోరుతున్నా. ఏదైనా ఈ పండుగలో వంటకాలు ఎన్ని చేసిండో, ఇప్పుడే నా గొంగడ వేసిండు, కానీ నేను అనుకున్నా మేకప్ ఇల్లు ఇస్తాడు అనుకున్నాం. మేకప్ ఇల్లు ఇవ్వలే మా దేవతన్న, కానీ గొంగడు ఇచ్చిండు. గొంగడు కప్పుకో పట్టుకో అంటున్నాడు. కాదే, నేను అనుకున్నా మేక ఇస్తే, మేకప్ ఇల్లు ఇస్తే అంటే లోపల కార్యం పేగులు ఇవన్నీ తినొచ్చు అని నేను అనుకున్నా. కానీ ఏదైనా ఇవాళ ఈ సాంప్రదాయాన్ని కొనసాగించాలి. ఈ కల్చర్ను ఇతర ప్రాంతాలకు కూడా ఇవ్వాలి. మన ఈ సాంప్రదాయం అలై బలై ఉత్తర భారతంలో కూడా ఈ కలిసే వ్యవహారం మనం యావత్ భారతదేశంలో దిక్సూచి కావాలి. ఇవాళ నుంచి బండారు దత్తాత్రేయ కాదు, అలై బలై దత్తాత్రేయ పేరే ఇవాళ నుంచి మార్చుకోవాలి. దత్తన్న నువ్వు మాటికి ఏది బండారు తీసేసి ఇవాళ నుంచి అలై బలై దత్తాయని పెట్టుకుంటే అది చిరకాలం మిగులుతుంది. చిన్నప్పుడు నీ కుటుంబంలో పెట్టిండొచ్చు, కానీ నువ్వు సర్వీస్ చేసి అది గవర్నర్ చేసి రాష్ట్రంలో ఎంపీ చేసినావు కనుక ఈ అలై బలై గుర్తు పర్మనెంట్ ఉంటుంది. ఇది దత్తాత్రేయ ఉల్ఫ్ అలై బలై. దత్తాత్రేయ ఏ పేరు అంటే అలై బలై అని పెట్టాలని చెప్పు.
AI is everywhere, but not all AI is equal. Smarter AI is your AI. Personalized, protected, and easy to deploy. Smarter AI brings the AI to your business and your customers. And with full stack AI hardware, software, and service solutions, we bring
Smarter AI for all. Lenovo.
Good morning, namaskar. Season's greetings to each one of you. This is the 51st meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee, that is the MPC, and this is how it goes. The Flexible Inflation Targeting Framework has completed 8 years since its introduction in 2016. This is a major structural reforms of 21st century India. It stands out for its committee approach to decision making, transparency of policy making process and communication, accountability hinging upon quantitatively defined inflation target, and operational independence. Over the years, the framework has matured across various interest rate cycles and monetary policy stances. When I look back, I can say with confidence that the flexible inflation targeting has served us well over the years and has proved its mettle. It brought about an era of price stability in the pre-COVID-19 period, with inflation averaging around the target rate of 4%. Thereafter, despite continuing global turmoil from multiple sources in the last 4 years or so, the flexibility embedded in the flexible inflation targeting framework has helped us to effectively address these unprecedented challenges while supporting growth. Monetary policy in India was able to respond to the economic slowdown decisively and swiftly in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, and again preemptively during the buildup of inflationary pressures after the war began in Ukraine in early 2022. The prevailing well-balanced growth inflation dynamics is indeed a testimony to the success of this monetary policy framework. Let me now turn to the decisions and deliberations of the Monetary Policy Committee. The Monetary Policy Committee met on, and this time, as you would be aware, this time we have 3 new external members in the MPC. The Monetary Policy Committee with 3 new external members met on 7th, 8th and 9th October. And after assessing the evolving macroeconomic and financial conditions and the outlook, the MPC decided by a majority of 5 out of 6 members to keep the policy repo rate unchanged at 6.5%. Consequently, the standing deposit facility, that is the SDF rate, remains at 6.25%, and the marginal standing facility, that is the MSF rate and the bank rate, they stand at 6.75%. Further, the MPC decided unanimously to change the stance, that is the stance of the monetary policy, to neutral, and also decided to, let me read it again, the MPC decided unanimously to change the stance to neutral and to remain unambiguously focused on a durable alignment of inflation with the target while supporting growth. The MPC noted that currently the macroeconomic parameters of inflation and growth are well balanced. Headline inflation is on a downward trajectory, though its pace has been slow and uneven. Going forward, the moderation in headline inflation is expected to reverse in September and likely to remain elevated in the near term due to adverse base effects, among other factors. Food inflation pressures could see some easing later in the financial year on the back of strong Kharif sowing, adequate buffer stocks, and good soil moisture conditions, which are conducive for Rabi sowing. Adverse weather events continue to pose contingent risks to food inflation. Core inflation, on the other hand, appears to have bottomed out. Fuel component of the CPI remains in contraction. Domestic growth has sustained its momentum with private consumption and investment growing in tandem. Resilient growth gives us the space to focus on inflation so as to enable its durable descent to the 4% target. In these circumstances, the MPC decided to remain watchful of the evolving outlook in the coming months. Keeping in view the prevailing inflation and growth conditions and the outlook, the MPC considered it appropriate to change the stance to neutral and to remain, I repeat, and to remain unambiguously focused on a durable alignment of inflation with the target, while of course supporting growth. I would now turn to an assessment of the growth and inflation situation. First, let me talk in brief about the global growth conditions. The global economy has remained resilient since the last meeting of the MPC in August. Although downside risks from increasingly intense geopolitical conflicts, geoeconomic fragmentation, financial market volatility, and elevated public debt continue to play out. Manufacturing is showing signs of slowdown while services activity is holding up. World trade is exhibiting improvement. Inflation is softening, supported by lower energy prices. Growing divergence in inflation growth dynamics across countries has resulted in varying monetary policy responses. Let me now turn to domestic growth. Real GDP grew by 6.7% in the first quarter of this financial year, that is 24-25. And this was led by a revival in private consumption and improvement in investment. The share of investment in GDP reached its highest level since 2012-13. Government expenditure, on the other hand, contracted during the first quarter. On the supply side, gross value added, that is GVA, expanded by 6.8%, surpassing the GDP growth, aided by strong industrial and services sector activities. High-frequency indicators available so far suggest that domestic economic activity continues to be steady. The main components from the supply side, that is agriculture, manufacturing, and services, they remain resilient. Agricultural growth has been supported by above normal southwest monsoon rainfall and better kharif sowing. Higher reservoir levels with good moisture conditions of soil augur well for the ensuing rabi crop. Manufacturing activity is gaining on the back of improving domestic demand, lower input costs, and supportive policy environment from the government. 8 core industries output fell by 1.8% in August on a high base. Excess rainfall also dampened the production in certain sectors such as electricity, coal, and cement in August. The Purchasing Managers Index, that is PMI for manufacturing, at 56.5 for September remained elevated. The services sector continues to grow at a strong pace. PMI services at 57.7 in September indicates robust expansion. On the demand side, rural demand is trending upwards while urban demand continues to hold firm. Government consumption is improving. Investment activity remains buoyant, with government capex rebounding from a contraction observed in the first quarter of this year. Private investment also continues to gain steam on the back of expansion in non-food bank credit, higher capacity utilization, and rising investment intentions. On the external front, services exports is supporting overall growth. Looking ahead, India's growth story remains intact as its fundamental drivers, namely consumption and investment demand, are gaining momentum. Prospects of private consumption, the mainstay of aggregate demand, look bright on the back of improved agricultural outlook and rural demand. Sustained buoyancy in services would also support urban demand. Government expenditure of the center and the states is expected to pick up pace in line with the budget estimates. Investment activity would benefit from consumer and business optimism, government's continued thrust on capex, and healthy balance sheets of banks and corporates. Taking all these factors into consideration, real GDP growth for 24-25 is projected at 7.2%, with Q2 at 7%, Q3 at 7.4%, and Q4 7.4%. Real GDP growth for Q1 of next financial year, that is 25-26, is projected at 7.3%. The risks are evenly balanced. I would now like to turn to inflation. Now, as anticipated, headline inflation softened significantly in July and August, with base effect playing a major role in the month of July. Food inflation experienced a certain degree of correction during these 2 months. Considerable divergence, however, was observed within the food subgroups. Now, whatever I am saying, I have given a lot of data in the footnote of my statement, which as usual will be uploaded in the RBI website immediately after my statement is, immediately after I complete my statement. For example, I just now said that considerable divergence, however, was observed within the food subgroups. So this is backed up by the data which I have given in the footnotes. And in fact, all the statements that I am making are backed up by supportive data there in the footnotes. So those of you who are interested may like to have a look at them after it is uploaded. Now, deflation in fuel group deepened on softening electricity and LPG prices. Core inflation, on the other hand, edged up in July and August. The CPI print for the month of September is expected to see a big jump due to unfavorable base effects and pick up in food price momentum. And this would be caused by the lingering effects of a shortfall in production of onion, potato, and chana dal, that is gram, in 2023-24, among other factors. The headline inflation trajectory, however, is projected to sequentially moderate in Q4 of the current financial year due to good kharif harvest, ample buffer stocks of cereals, and a likely good crop in the ensuing Rabi season. Unexpected weather events and worsening geopolitical conflicts continue as major upside risks to inflation. International crude prices have become volatile in the month of October, that is in the current month. The recent uptick in food and metal prices, and this is very important, the recent uptick in food and metal prices as seen in the FAO, that is Food and Agricultural Organization, and the World Bank price indices for September, if sustained, can add to the upside risks to CPI inflation. Taking into account all these factors, CPI inflation for 2024-25, that is for the current year, is projected at 4.5%, with Q2 at 4.1%, Q3 at 4.8%, and Q4 at 4.2%. CPI inflation for the first quarter, that is Q1 of next financial year, that is 2025-26, is projected at 4.3%. The risks are evenly balanced. Now, I have summarized our assessment of the domestic growth and the inflation conditions and the outlook as per our assessment. Now, what do this raises the question, what do these inflation and growth conditions mean for monetary policy? The developments since the last meeting of MPC in August indicate further progress towards realizing a durable disinflation towards the target. Despite the near-term upsides to inflation from food prices, the evolving domestic price situation signals moderation in headline inflation thereafter. The agricultural crop outlook is turning out to be favorable with improving prospects of Kharif and Rabi output. These factors could lead to an easing of food inflation pressures, but this optimism is subject to weather-related shocks, if any. Core inflation is likely to remain broadly contained on continuing transmission of past monetary policy actions, unless, of course, there are surprises in global commodity prices. The prevailing and expected inflation growth balance, please mark my words, the prevailing and the expected inflation growth balance have created congenial conditions for a change in monetary policy stance to neutral. Even as there is greater confidence in navigating the last mile of disinflation, significant risks, I repeat, significant risks to inflation from adverse weather events, accentuating geopolitical conflicts, and the very recent increase in certain commodity prices continue to stare at us. The adverse impact of these risks cannot be undermined, cannot be underestimated. It's with a lot of effort that the inflation horse has been brought to the stable, that is closer to the target within the tolerance band compared to its highest or heightened levels 2 years ago. We have to be very careful about opening the gate, as the horse may simply bolt again. We must keep the horse in tight leash so that we do not lose control. Going forward, we need to closely monitor the evolving conditions for further confirmation of the disinflationary impulses. I would now like to turn to the liquidity and financial market conditions. System liquidity remained in surplus during August and September and also in early October, with a pickup in government spending and decline in currency in circulation. Liquidity conditions, however, had turned into deficit for a brief period during the latter half of September, with the buildup of government cash balances on account of tax-related outflows. In sync with the shifting liquidity conditions, the Reserve Bank proactively conducted two-way operations to ensure alignment of interbank overnight rate with the policy repo rate. Across the term money market segments, the yields on 3-month treasury bills, that is T-bills, and commercial papers issued by non-banking financial companies, that is NBFCs, eased, while that on certificates of deposits firmed up marginally. The 10-year G-Sec yield softened in August-September on global and domestic cues, including policy pivot in the United States and also in some major economies. And also, these are not the only factors, but the yields in August-September, I'm talking about the 10-year G-Sec yields, they softened somewhat in August and September due to multiple factors, which would include pivot in the monetary policy of the US and some major economies, improved global investor sentiment, benign domestic inflation, and accelerated fiscal consolidation. The term premium, that is 10-year G-Sec yield minus 3-month T-bills yield, has remained stable in the recent few months. Transmission to the credit market has been satisfactory. Moving forward, the Reserve Bank will continue to be nimble and flexible in its liquidity management operations. We will deploy an appropriate mix of instruments to modulate both frictional and durable liquidity so as to ensure that money market interest rates evolve in an orderly manner. During the current financial year, that is up to 8th of October, that is till yesterday, the exchange rate of the Indian rupee has remained largely range bound. The Indian rupee also continued to be the least volatile among peer EME currencies. This was so even during the high volatile episode following the unwinding of the yen carry trade in early August this year. The lower volatility of the Indian rupee reflects India's strong macroeconomic fundamentals and improved external sector outlook. I would now turn to financial stability. The health parameters of banks and NBFCs in India continue to be strong. There has been some recent commentary on the likelihood of stress buildup in a few unsecured loan segments like loans for consumption purposes, microfinance loans, and credit card outstandings. The Reserve Bank is closely monitoring the incoming information and will take measures as may be considered necessary. Banks and NBFCs on their part need to carefully assess their individual exposures in these areas, both in terms of size and quality. Their underwriting standards and post-sanction monitoring have to be robust. Continued attention also needs to be given to potential risks from inoperative deposit accounts, cybersecurity landscape, mule accounts, and a few other factors which we have been stressing and highlighting time and again in the public domain as well as in our interaction with the banks and NBFCs. Now, overall, I would again like to stress that our banking and the NBFC sector, that is the financial sector, remains healthy, resilient, and stable. NBFCs in particular have registered an impressive growth over the last few years. This has resulted in more credit flow to remote and underserved segments, bolstering financial inclusion. While the overall NBFC sector remains healthy, let me re-emphasize, while the overall NBFC sector remains healthy, I have a few messages to certain outliers. First, it is observed that some NBFCs are aggressively pursuing growth without building up sustainable business practices and risk management frameworks, which should be commensurate with the scale and complexity of their portfolio. An imprudent growth at any cost approach would be counterproductive for their own health. Second, driven by significant accretion to their capital from both domestic and overseas sources, and sometimes under pressure from their investors, some NBFCs, including microfinance institutions and housing finance companies, are chasing excessive returns on their equity. While such pursuits are in the domain of the boards and managements of NBFCs, concerns arise when interest rates charged by them become usurious and get combined with unreasonably high processing fees and frivolous penalties. These practices are sometimes further accentuated by what appears to be a push effect as business targets drive retail credit growth rather than its actual demand. I am not generalizing it for the whole NBFC sector. There are certain NBFCs where it is happening bilaterally. We are engaged with them, but I think this is a message which it's important not only for these outliers to keep in mind, but I think this should act as a guidance for the entire sector. Now, the consequent high cost, I was talking about the push effect, that is business targets driving retail growth rather than its actual demand. In that context, I would like to say that the consequent high cost and high indebtedness could pose financial stability risks if not addressed by these NBFCs in time. Third, NBFCs may review their prevailing compensation practices, variable pay, and incentive structures, some of which appear to be purely target-driven in certain NBFCs. Such practices may result in adverse work culture and poor customer service. To sum up, it is important that NBFCs, including MFIs and housing finance companies, follow sustainable business goals, a compliance-first culture, a strong risk management framework, a strict adherence to fair practices code, and a sincere approach to customer grievances. The Reserve Bank is closely monitoring these areas and will not hesitate to take appropriate action if necessary. Self-correction by NBFCs would, however, be the desired option. Coming to external sector, India's current account deficit, that is CAD, widened to 1.1% of GDP in the first quarter of this financial year, that is 24-25, and this was on account of higher trade deficit. Buoyancy in services exports and strong remittance receipts are expected to keep the current account deficit within the sustainable level. On the external financing side, foreign portfolio investment, that is FPI flows, have seen a turnaround from the net outflows of $4.2 billion in April and May this year. They have turned from net outflows. In April and May, we had net outflow of $4.2 billion. Now they have now turned to net inflows of $19.2 billion during June to October, and this is the figure till 7th of October. Foreign direct investment, that is FDI flows, remain strong in 24-25, as both gross and net FDI flows have improved in April and July. While external commercial borrowings moderated, non-resident deposits recorded higher net inflows compared to last year. India's foreign exchange reserves have already crossed a new milestone of $700 billion. Overall, India's external sector remains resilient as key external sector vulnerability indicators continue to improve. And when I say key external sector vulnerabilities continue to improve, I have backed it up by the data in the footnote of the statement. On the whole, we remain confident of meeting our external financing requirements comfortably. I shall now announce certain additional measures. The first relates to responsible lending conduct, levy of foreclosure charges, and or prepayment penalties on loans. The Reserve Bank has taken several measures over the years to safeguard consumer interest. As part of these measures, banks and NBFCs are not permitted to levy foreclosure charges or prepayment penalties on any floating rate term loan sanctioned to individual borrowers for non-business purposes. That is, for purposes other than business. It is now proposed to broaden the scope of these guidelines to include loans to micro and small enterprises, that is MSEs. A draft circular in this regard shall be issued for public consultation. The second announcement relates to discussion paper on capital raising avenues for primary urban cooperative banks, that is for UCBs. The Reserve Bank has undertaken several initiatives in recent years to strengthen the UCB sector. Such initiatives include issuance of regulatory guidelines in 2022 for issue and regulation of share capital and securities by the urban cooperative banks. To provide more flexibility and avenues to the UCBs, that is urban cooperative banks, to raise capital, a discussion paper on capital raising avenues for UCBs will be issued for feedback and suggestions from stakeholders. The third announcement relates to creation of Reserve Bank Climate Risk Information System. Climate change is emerging as a significant risk to financial system world over. This makes it necessary for regulated entities to undertake robust climate risk assessment, which is sometimes hindered by gaps in high-quality climate-related data. To bridge these data gaps, the Reserve Bank proposes to create a data repository, namely the Reserve Bank Climate Risk Information System, or in short RB-CRIS, Reserve Bank Climate Risk Information System, that is RB-CRIS. The next announcement relates to UPI, where we are enhancing certain limits for the various transactions. UPI has transformed India's financial landscape by making digital payments accessible and inclusive through continuous innovation and adaptation. To further encourage wider adoption of UPI and make it more inclusive, it has been decided, first, to enhance the per transaction limit, in UPI 123 Pay from rupees 5,000 to rupees 10,000. And second, it has also been decided to increase the UPI Lite wallet limit from rupees 2,000 to rupees 5,000 and per transaction limit from rupees 500 to rupees 100. The final announcement relates to introduction of beneficiary account name lookup facility. Let me explain what it means. At present, UPI and Immediate Payment Service, that is IMPS, provide a facility for the remitter of funds to verify the name of the receiver of the funds, that is the beneficiary, before executing a payment transaction. It is now proposed to introduce such a facility for RTGS as well as the NEFT systems. This facility will enable the remitter to verify the name of the account holder before effecting funds transfer to him or her through RTGS or NEFT. This facility will also have the effect of reducing the possibility of wrong credits and frauds. Let me now conclude. Today, the Indian economy presents a picture of stability and strength. The balance between inflation and growth is well poised. India's growth story remains intact. Inflation is on a declining path, although we still have a distance to cover. The external sector demonstrates the strength of the economy. Forex reserves are scaling new peaks. Fiscal consolidation is underway. The financial sector remains sound and resilient. Global investor optimism in India's prospects is perhaps at its highest ever. We are, however, not complacent. I repeat, we are not complacent, especially amidst the rapidly evolving global conditions. The monetary policy action today reflects the MPC's assessment that at the current juncture, it would be appropriate to have greater flexibility and optionality to act in sync with the evolving conditions and the outlook. We stand unambiguously committed to ensure durable alignment of inflation with the target while supporting growth. In the prevailing macroeconomic conditions and the outlook, Mahatma Gandhi's words remain highly relevant. And I quote, "When the method is good, success is bound to come in the end." Thank you. Namaskar.
நாங்க இப்போ ஒரு அட்வென்ச்சருக்கு போறோம்.
இன்னைக்கும் ஏதாவது ஏடா கூடமா பண்ணாம இருந்தா சரிதான்.
மியூசியத்துல வந்து நீ கேட்ட லாகின் மிஸ்ஸிங்.
இந்த டாலரோட வேல்யூ என்ன? $1 மில்லியன் வரைக்கும் விலை போகும்.
சும்மா கூடி பேசி விளையாடுறாங்கன்னு பார்த்தா இந்த பசங்க என்னெல்லாம் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்காங்க.
ஏய் நம்ம சின்ன பசங்கடா, இது அவ்வளவு ஈஸியா ஆர்டர் பண்ண முடியாது.
வீடியோக்குள்ள அந்த சின்ன பசங்க நம்ம கிட்ட இருப்பாங்க.
अगोड़ा पे पाइए बेस्ट होटल्स इन कमाल के प्राइसेस.
डोमेस्टिक एंड इंटरनेशनल दोनों.
अगोड़ा.
Welcome to the first edition of the ET World Leaders Forum. You've been around now from Ukraine to Singapore. Now we have you in Delhi, all in a space of a week or so. My question, how was the train ride?
I could have done with a Vande Bharat. It was, It was about 10 hours each way. And I think given the situation, obviously, I mean, you got what you got. But 10 hours is 10 hours.
When was the last time an Indian Prime Minister took a train to visit a country? We've heard of, I mean, the image of Nehru in a yak is there.
Well, I remember Mr. Modi doing a Shinkansen, a bullet train in Japan. I'm trying to think, I offhand cannot remember any other train ride, at least for a long time.
So that was a crisis point, current crisis point in the global picture as you see it. There are many such crisis points. The world is in turmoil and you've been talking about it. Everybody has been talking about it. How would you paint the picture as an Indian foreign minister?
The global picture?
Yeah. But
well, look, I think if I were to have a one-word summary of this situation, it's probably the first word which you've used for the panel, which is risks. Because what we have seen really for the last 15 years is a steady increase in terms of risks in the to the global order, in the international economy, in individual countries. Now, there are a number of reasons for it. I mean, there are different kinds of risks. I mean, you would say, okay, as climate change has accelerated, there's a set of risks out there. We saw a once-in-a-century pandemic. That was a risk. I mean, that was a super black swan. But there are risks which are coming actually out of the process of change. I mean, because there's global change, and change by nature is disruptive. And, you spoke about Ukraine. I mean, that's an example, not the only one. So if there are today, there's a major war going on in Europe, there's a huge conflict going on in West Asia and the Middle East. There are tensions around Asia. There's a revival of border territorial claims and border frictions. Those are actually, with each one of them, the risks mount. There are risks to supply chains today, not just Houthis in the Red Sea. I mean, it could be climate risks. There could be pandemic risks. There are technology risks. I mean, the idea that, there are borders and borders are some kind of hard line and problems can be stopped on that side of the border, I think those days are over. So look at it any which way. I mean, to me, every government, consciously or otherwise, is today assessing risks, and the majority of policies are on de-risking. And I mean, that sounds a bit defensive. I mean, there's other aspects. The ones who do it better have the ability then to explore opportunities, but the focus of the world is in de-risking.
Part of the core decision making of this government, what is our strategy? Is it a mitigation strategy? Is it a leveraging strategy? Or is it just a managing strategy?
In a kind of way, it's an all of the above. But if you manage it well, if you de-risk it well, then you have many other options. I mean, I just kind of turn you back to the COVID era, okay? There were countries, I mean, everybody came out of the COVID badly. Those who came out less badly came out well. Now, I think we were among the countries who, largely because we followed our own, our own understanding of our own society and didn't listen too much to free advice which we were getting in large quantities, we actually took a number of steps during that period, which allowed us to come out much better out of COVID than the rest of the world. In a way, you could say that, I mean, to me, one big lesson out of COVID was health security, food security, manufacturing security. Okay. Now, a lot of our policies today, when you say make in India, it's part of de-risking. When you say that, look, we will produce our own vaccines, and, at that time many people questioned it. That's also part of de-risking. When we sometimes, intervene to ensure that our food markets are stable, that too is part of de-risking. Now, if you've done a good job in de-risking, then you can actually have the luxury to explore other opportunities. So we are, because I think we have done decently out there, we are today, let us say, exploring opportunities, trying to get involved more in global supply chains, looking at, say, domains like semiconductors, where historically, which we have neglected, we have now sort of wading into it very, very seriously. Looking at really the sunrise sectors, looking at EVs, looking at renewables, looking at drones, looking at space, looking at AI. All those you can do if you've done that basic de-risking. If we had not succeeded so well, I think we wouldn't have the bandwidth or the attention span to actually look at other areas.
Here there's another view that had the pandemic not happened and we had taken a growth trajectory, this minus the pandemic, we've not reached that growth trajectory yet. This year's economic survey also points out to FDI flows dropping, and that's been an issue. There is this whole view that we should relook at our China approach, maybe allow some of the FDI to come in, remove those barriers, not be so stringent with visas, and look at maybe some of the low middle-end supply chain opportunities which are coming from there. Your views, sir, because you have the security picture at hand as well.
No, look, to say what would I have done had the pandemic not happened to me is a waste of time. The pandemic happened. So why speculate about what could have happened? So now that it has happened, and everybody is looking at a post-pandemic recovery, and not just a post-pandemic recovery, there are many other factors. I mean, the global environment has changed. I mean, the very sharp competition between the United States and China today is the dominant feature of the global environment. It has consequences for the international economy. It has deep consequences for the technology world. So these are real factors. Now, you can't build policies around, I wish that had not happened and I would like to go that way. So I take what has happened as a given. Now, in that given, your question on China. Look, China in many ways is a unique problem because it is a unique polity, it is a unique economy. And unless one tries to grasp that uniqueness and understand it, I think the judgments, the conclusions, and possibly the policy prescriptions flowing out of it can be problematic. It's not just an Indian problem.
Are you referring to the economic survey?
No. I'm referring to the world's response to China. If today people are complaining about trade deficits with China, and we are too, why is that? Because decades ago, we all consciously chose to overlook the nature of Chinese production and the advantages which they enjoyed in a system where they got a level playing field with all the advantages that they brought to bear. So my point is there is a general China problem. Do remember, Pranab, we are not the only country in the world which is having a debate about China. Go to Europe and ask them, what is today among your major economic or national security debates? It's about China. Look at the United States. It's obsessed with China, and rightly so in many ways. So the fact is, let's not make out as though it's only India which has a China problem. India has a China problem, a special China problem. That's over and above the world's general China problem. So my point is, when you look at this, when we approach the issue of China as a whole, Chinese trade with China, investment from China, exchanges of various kinds with China, we have to, if you neglect to take into account that this is a very unique country with a very different way of working, I think your basics start to go off track. So once you understand that, because there is a general, I think the sensible response to it is to take the precautions which a country like India should be taking. Now, it has never been the government's position that we should not be having investments from China or doing business with China. It is that investment, because we are largely talking investments here. When it comes, trade is a different matter. I mean, I'm happy to talk about why we should be manufacturing more. But on the investments issue, I think, to me, it's common sense that investments from China would be scrutinized. I think the border and the state of relations between India and China call for it. But I think even if countries who do not have a border with China are scrutinizing investments from China. I mean, Europe doesn't have a border, America doesn't have a border, but yet they're doing that. So the fact is, the issue is not do you have investments from China or not. It's not a yes or no answer. It is what should be the appropriate level of scrutiny, how should you handle it. And when you look at that, sometimes, when I read stuff, including in your newspaper, where people say, we should clearly identify this is national security. It doesn't work that way anymore. Because what is national security itself has expanded. I mean, tell me, if we were completely reliant, let us say, on pharmaceuticals from China, does it not have national security implications? If your telecom is, based on Chinese technology, can you be impervious to it? So it's not like, there is a clear identification of this is a yes and that is a no. It's a much more complex factor. And in my view, at a certain level with certain countries in certain situations, the line between economics and security is a very thin line. So I wouldn't, sharpen this and make it a kind of a yes or no, we should be allowing them open door, or we should close the door. It's nobody's case that either of those two options should be there.
So I'll put it a more direct question. There has been a lot of talk about taking a relook at Press Note 3. Do you think Press Note 3 is serving us well? Is it lived its time, needs a relook? Or what's your assessment?
No, I think I answered that question. The question is, in my view, should investments, a country like India, in a competitive age where where technologies can be leveraged, investments can be leveraged, market shares can be leveraged, I think a country like India, and this is not necessarily an answer limited to China, I think a country like India must look at the investments that are coming in. Not necessarily negatively, but you must scrutinize it. You must have some sense of what is coming in which sector. You cannot be hands-off and say, well, the market will take care of it, or this will be great because there will be more production. There should be. I mean, I'm pro-investment. I'm pro-growth. But I do think somewhere there should be a balance.
Some feel that the US narrow yard, high fences has worked better. How differentiated are we? Or are we somewhere in the similar?
No, look, the US is the US. I would not extrapolate their situation, because the US and China are engaged in a different competition. It is a competition for, in a sense, you can say, for global primacy or global leads. And it has many, many dimensions to it. Our situation is very different. Our situation today is, for years, I have actually, in the name of globalization, allowed, foreign players advantages in my home economy to the detriment of my domestic players. That is the reality. And I think that is something which we need to address. I mean, I genuinely believe that, at the end of the day, we cannot just say these are our bottom lines, this, this is most, L1 is from China, or, these are the most competitive. All that works, I understand that. I mean, I've had a brief exposure to business myself. But I think there is a larger, even business has a social obligation. And there is an obligation to Indian workers. There is an obligation to our small businesses. We cannot be hollowed out in the name of efficiency and globalization. I think that's a very, very dangerous thing to advocate.
I'll move you on a little bit to the wider neighborhood, our closer neighborhood. We all are aware of the multiple crisis point. We know what has happened in Bangladesh. You had a very good statement this morning in the newspapers on Pakistan. Here's my ask to you. See, something which has not been talked about much. For the last decade, and you've been involved at various levels, you've used economic levers with the neighborhood. Has that given you better options as you deal with these crises now? And how integrated have you actually been able, because we hear these stories about the power grid, about connectivity. How is it really working in terms of policy options? Has there been a real change? Be honest about this.
Let me come back to de-risking. Okay? What happens when you have multiple neighbors? And, by definition, relationships with neighbors are very complicated. They're all democratic polities. Governments will change. There will be political debates in their country. Often we will be the center of those debates. It's natural. We are a big country. So we have to expect and plan for and build into our policy making an expectation that there will be changes, some more organic, some more disruptive in our neighborhood. How do you then how do you stabilize? Because I'm now de-risking the neighborhood. Okay. You do that by creating the factors of stability. If two countries are linked by, let us say, a power grid, actually you have secured both ends. One is a producer, one is a customer, both have an interest in keeping it going. If you have a fuel pipeline, the same logic applies. If you have more trade, if you have more tourism, let's say, take Bangladesh. There's a lot of medical tourism which happens out of Bangladesh. Okay, the patients benefit there, the industry benefits here. So the whole point is, for the last 10 years when we've been talking about neighborhood first, the entire exercise is about making sure that there are so many connections in so many domains which are so indispensable, which are so deep, which are so central to everybody's calculation, that the factors of volatility get relatively diminished. So whatever happens finally, people will say, okay, we may have those differences, but there's that reality out there. And I think that's good for us.
Are you seeing that change happening in Bangladesh with the interim administration? People are talking about extradition requests to arrest.
No, look, you are in the newspaper business. For you, it's a 24-hour cycle. I'm in the diplomacy business. For me, I'm prepared to wait at least a few months for anything to fructify. So, I think I would not be in a hurry to call